The smell of garlic and olive oil has a way of reaching the sidewalk before the front door even opens. In the tenement kitchens of Mulberry Street and Elizabeth Street in Lower Manhattan, that smell was constant. It drifted through hallways, up fire escapes, into rooms where 8 people slept in shifts. Italian families who came to this country with almost nothing figured out how to make food that tasted like home on a budget that barely covered rent. Number 16 on this list is a dish most Americans would not touch, but Italian grandmothers turned it into something people lined up for. Number 9 uses a vegetable that grew wild in empty lots, and nobody thought to charge for it. And number 5 stretched a single tin of fish into a meal for an entire family. So hit subscribe, because here are 25 cheap meals Italian immigrants ate to survive the 1930s. Let us count them down. Number 25. Pasta aglio e olio. 3 ingredients: garlic, olive oil, and whatever dried pasta was left in the cupboard. In neighborhoods like Arthur Avenue in the Bronx and Federal Hill in Providence, this was the dish that appeared when everything else ran out. The garlic went into the oil slowly, sliced thin, never crushed, because burning it meant wasting it. The oil turned golden and fragrant before the pasta hit the pan. Some families added a pinch of dried red pepper flakes if they had them. Others stirred in a handful of parsley pulled from a window box. The whole thing took less than 15 minutes from stove to table. It cost almost nothing, and it tasted like something a person might actually order in a restaurant. That was the trick of Italian cooking in the Depression. The simplest things carried the most dignity. Number 24. Peppers and eggs. Pepperoni e uova. This was a sandwich before it was a dinner. In South Philadelphia and in the Italian neighborhoods of Newark, women fried long green peppers in a skillet until the skins blistered and the flesh went soft. Then they cracked eggs directly into the pan and scrambled everything together. The peppers gave off a sweetness that made the eggs taste richer than they were. Some families ate it between 2 slices of Italian bread. Others ate it straight from the pan with a fork. During Lent, when meat was forbidden, this became the default Friday meal in thousands of Italian households across the Northeast. It was hot, filling, and it cost next to nothing. A dozen eggs and a few peppers could feed a family of 6. The dish never appeared in any cookbook of that era. It did not need to. Every Italian grandmother already knew it by heart. Number 23. Dandelion greens. In the empty lots and cracked sidewalks of East Harlem and the Hill District in Pittsburgh, Italian women bent down with knives and cut dandelion greens straight from the dirt. They were not foraging for fun. They were feeding their families for free. The greens were bitter, but that bitterness was the whole point. Sautéed in olive oil with a few cloves of garlic and a squeeze of lemon, they turned into something sharp and alive on the tongue. Some families boiled them first to take the edge off, then dressed them with vinegar. The older generation called them cicoria selvatica. They knew which lots had the best patches and which ones to avoid. Children were sent out with paper bags to gather enough for dinner. It was a vegetable that belonged to nobody and fed everybody. Number 22. Polenta with milk. Cornmeal cooked low and slow in a heavy pot until it thickened into a golden mush. In the Italian neighborhoods of Utica, New York, and in the mining towns of West Virginia, polenta was what families ate when bread was too expensive to buy every day. Northern Italian immigrants brought this tradition from the Veneto and Lombardy regions, where polenta had been a staple for centuries. In America, they adapted it. Some served it with a ladle of tomato sauce and a dusting of whatever hard cheese they could find. Others poured warm milk over it and ate it as breakfast. Children grew up eating polenta the way other kids ate oatmeal. When it cooled and hardened overnight, it was sliced and fried in a little oil the next morning. Nothing was wasted. The same pot of cornmeal fed a family twice. Number 21. Stracciatella, Roman egg drop soup. The name means little rags, which is what the egg looks like when it hits the boiling broth. A pot of chicken broth, or more often just salted water with a leftover bone, was brought to a rolling boil. Then, a beaten egg, mixed with a handful of grated cheese and a pinch of nutmeg, was poured in slowly while the liquid was stirred with a fork. The egg cooked instantly into thin, ragged ribbons. The whole thing took 5 minutes. In the tenement kitchens of Bleecker Street and Mott Street, this soup stretched a single egg into a meal for 3 or 4 people. It was the kind of food that made hunger feel temporary. A warm bowl, a little bread on the side, and the evening felt manageable. Number 20. Pasta e fagioli. The full name is pasta e fagioli, but in the neighborhoods of South Brooklyn and the North End of Boston, people just called it pasta fazool. It was the single most important survival meal in the Italian immigrant kitchen. The base was dried beans, usually cannellini or borlotti, soaked overnight and then simmered for hours with whatever aromatics were available. A carrot, a stalk of celery, a piece of onion. The broth that formed was thick and starchy, almost creamy, without a drop of cream in it. Small pasta shapes went in near the end, tubetti or ditalini, the cheapest cuts from the box. The pasta absorbed the liquid and swelled until the whole pot turned into something halfway between a soup and a stew. Every family had a version. In some households, a ham bone or a piece of pork rind went in for flavor. In others, a spoonful of tomato paste turned the broth red. Some families ate it thick enough to stand a spoon in. Others kept it loose and brothy. The differences were regional. Families from Naples made it one way. Families from Calabria made it another. And nobody's version was wrong. What made pasta e fagioli so essential was the math. A pound of dried beans cost a few cents. A box of pasta cost a few more. Together, they produced enough food for 2 or 3 meals. The protein from the beans and the carbohydrate from the pasta created a complete nutritional profile without any meat at all. Italian grandmothers did not know the science behind it. They just knew that when a child ate a bowl of pasta fazool, that child stopped complaining about being hungry. The pot sat on the back of the stove for days, reheated and stretched with water as needed. It was not a recipe. It was an economic strategy disguised as dinner. Number 19. Lentil soup, zuppa di lenticchie. Lentils were one of the cheapest dried goods on the shelf, and they cooked faster than any other bean. No soaking required. In the Italian communities of Trenton, New Jersey, and Youngstown, Ohio, lentil soup appeared on the table at least twice a week during the hardest years. The pot started with olive oil, garlic, and onion. Then the lentils went in with water or broth and simmered until they fell apart into a thick, earthy paste. Some families added a chopped carrot or a few leaves of Swiss chard. Others dropped in a small piece of dried sausage for flavor when they could afford it. The soup was humble, but it had a depth that surprised people who had never tried it. Lentils carry an almost smoky quality when cooked long enough. A bowl of it with a piece of bread was a full meal. Nobody walked away from that table hungry. Number 18. Escarole and white beans, scarola e fagioli. This dish showed up in nearly every Italian household on the East Coast, from the row houses of Baltimore's Little Italy to the triple-deckers of Worcester, Massachusetts. A head of escarole was washed, chopped, and wilted in a pan with olive oil and garlic. Then cooked cannellini beans were stirred in, along with enough broth or bean liquid to make it soupy. A pinch of red pepper flakes gave it a little warmth. The combination of the slightly bitter greens and the creamy beans created a flavor that was far more satisfying than the ingredients suggested. It was also fast, 30 minutes from cutting board to table. Families ate it as a main course with crusty bread, not as a side dish. In the Depression years, the distinction between a side dish and a main course depended entirely on what else was in the pantry. There is something that happens to food when money disappears. It stops being about preference and starts being about mathematics. How many mouths? How many days until the next paycheck, if there even was one? Italian immigrant women in the 1930s did not have the luxury of choosing what to cook. They had the luxury of knowing how. And that knowledge, passed down through generations of scarcity in southern Italy, turned out to be the most valuable thing they carried across the Atlantic. Number 17. Pancato, bread soup. The idea of cooking bread in liquid sounds strange until you realize that stale bread was the one thing no Italian kitchen ever ran out of. In the neighborhoods around Worcester Street in New Haven and in the Italian section of Waterbury, Connecticut, women tore stale bread into pieces and dropped it into a pot of simmering tomato broth with garlic and a drizzle of olive oil. The bread soaked up the liquid and turned soft and rich. Some versions included a beaten egg stirred in at the end. Others were topped with a little grated cheese. The dish existed under different names in different regions. Papa al pomodoro in Tuscany, aquacotta in the Maremma. In America, it was just bread soup, and it solved a problem that every poor family faced: bread that was too hard to eat, but too precious to throw away. Number 16. Trippa, tripe. Most Americans in the 1930s would not go near it, but Italian families knew exactly what to do with it. Tripe is the lining of a cow's stomach, and it was one of the cheapest cuts at the butcher because almost nobody wanted it. In Italian Harlem and in the Italian neighborhoods of Cleveland's Murray Hill, women bought it for next to nothing, cleaned it with salt and vinegar until it turned white, and then braised it for hours in a tomato sauce with onions, celery, and a bay leaf. The long cooking transformed the rubbery texture into something tender and almost silky. Trippa alla Romana was the classic preparation, finished with a shower of pecorino cheese. The smell of it cooking filled entire apartment buildings. Some people loved it, others could not stand it. But the families who ate it never went hungry on the nights it appeared. It was the kind of food that rewarded patience and punished squeamishness. Number 15. Broccoli rabe with garlic, rapini. This bitter green was a staple in Southern Italian cooking long before it ever appeared on an American restaurant menu. In the 1930s, it was cheap and plentiful in the markets of 9th Avenue in Manhattan and in the Italian pushcart markets of downtown Newark. The preparation was simple. The rabe was blanched in boiling water for a minute to cut the bitterness, then sautéed in a generous amount of olive oil with sliced garlic and red pepper flakes. The garlic had to be golden, never brown. The pepper flakes had to bloom in the oil first. It came together in minutes and tasted like something far more expensive than it was. Families ate it over pasta, next to sausage when they could afford it, or just on its own with bread. The bitterness was the flavor, not a flaw, a feature. Number 14. Bacala, salt cod. Before refrigeration reached every tenement, dried and salted fish was one of the most reliable sources of protein a family could keep on hand. A single slab of bacala, stiff as a board, could sit on a shelf for months. When it was time to cook, the fish went into a bowl of cold water and soaked for 2 or 3 days, with the water changed several times until the salt drew out and the flesh turned soft and flaky. In the Italian neighborhoods of Gloucester, Massachusetts, and in the fishing communities along the Connecticut shore, bacala was more than just food. It was Friday. It was Lent. It was Christmas Eve, when the Feast of the 7 Fishes brought it to the center of the table. But during the Depression, it showed up on any night of the week because it was cheap and it lasted. The preparations varied by region. Families from Naples fried it in a light batter and served it with lemon. Families from Sicily simmered it in a tomato sauce with olives and capers. Families from the Veneto made it into a creamy spread called bacala mantecato, whipped with olive oil until it turned pale and smooth. Each version used the same inexpensive starting ingredient and turned it into something entirely different. What made bacala so important was its versatility. It could be a main course, a topping for pasta, a filling for sandwiches, or a component of a larger stew. A single piece of salt cod, properly soaked and prepared, could stretch across multiple meals. The families who relied on it did not think of it as peasant food. They thought of it as smart food, the kind of food that let a family eat well on almost nothing, as long as someone in the kitchen knew what to do with it. Number 13. Pasta e patate, pasta and potatoes. 2 starches in 1 pot sounds redundant until you taste it. In the Italian neighborhoods of Bridgeport, Connecticut, and in the coal towns of central Pennsylvania, this dish was a weekly fixture. Diced potatoes were simmered in a broth with garlic, a small piece of pancetta or a rind of cheese for flavor, and then small pasta was added directly to the pot. The starch from the potatoes and the pasta thickened the liquid into something almost creamy. The result was richer and more complex than any of its ingredients had a right to produce. Some families finished it in the oven to get a golden crust on top. Others ate it straight from the pot, thick and steaming. It was the arithmetic of poverty turned into something genuinely delicious. Two cheap things combined to create a third thing that felt like abundance. Number 12. Stuffed peppers, pepperoni ripieni. Italian bell peppers in the 1930s were not the smooth, blocky things sold in supermarkets today. They were irregular, thin-skinned, and sold cheaply at pushcart markets and neighborhood stands. In the homes of South Philadelphia and in the Italian sections of Stamford, Connecticut, women cut the tops off, scooped out the seeds, and filled them with a mixture of stale breadcrumbs, garlic, parsley, olive oil, and whatever bits of anchovy or cured meat were available. The stuffed peppers went into the oven or into a pot of simmering tomato sauce. The bread filling absorbed the juices from the pepper and the sauce, swelling into something soft and intensely flavored. It was an architecture of leftovers: stale bread, a few cheap vegetables, a drizzle of oil, and the patience to let it all cook together. The result always exceeded the sum of its parts. Number 11. Ciabatta, a vegetable stew that went by different names depending on which region of Italy the family came from. Ciabatta in Campania, Ciabatta in Calabria. In the backyard gardens and community plots of Italian neighborhoods in Detroit and in the suburbs outside Boston, families grew their own tomatoes, peppers, zucchini, eggplant, and potatoes. When the summer harvest came in, everything went into one pot. The vegetables were layered and slow-cooked with olive oil and garlic until they collapsed into each other. No meat, no broth, just vegetables, oil, and thyme. The stew was served hot or at room temperature, and it tasted better on the second day after the flavors had deepened overnight. Ciabatta was proof that Italian immigrant families did not need a butcher to eat well. They needed a patch of dirt, a few seeds, and a grandmother who knew when the pot was done. The women who cooked these meals did not call themselves chefs. They did not write anything down. The recipes lived in their hands, in the way they judged a pinch of salt or the color of a sauce by tilting the pot toward the window light. When they passed, the recipes did not always survive. Some dishes disappeared with the generation that made them. Others lived on only in the memory of the people who sat at those tables as children. That is the fragile part of this history. Number 10. Pizza fritta, fried dough. Before pizza parlors spread across every American city, Italian families were making their own dough at home and frying it in oil. In the kitchens of Mulberry Street and in the Italian neighborhoods of Hoboken, women mixed flour, water, yeast, and a pinch of salt, let it rise, then pulled off small pieces and dropped them into a pan of hot olive oil. The dough puffed up and turned golden brown in seconds. Some families ate it plain with a sprinkle of salt. Others topped it with a spoonful of tomato sauce and a grating of cheese. Children grabbed the pieces straight from the draining paper. Pizza fritta was not a recipe that required planning. It was what happened when there was flour in the bin and nothing else in the pantry. The smell of dough frying in oil could make an apartment feel like a celebration even when there was nothing to celebrate. That was its real purpose. Number 9. Cardone, cardoon soup. The cardoon is a thistle plant related to the artichoke, with long stalks that look like oversized celery but taste nothing like it. In southern Italy, it grew wild. In America, Italian immigrants found it growing along railroad tracks and at the edges of vacant lots. In the 1930s, families in the Italian neighborhoods of St. Louis and in the communities around Vineland, New Jersey, gathered it for free. Preparing cardone was labor-intensive. The outer stalks were peeled to remove the tough, stringy fibers. The inner stalks were cut into pieces and boiled until tender. Then the real cooking began. In some families, the boiled cardoon pieces were dipped in egg batter and fried. In others, they were simmered in a broth with meatballs made from whatever scraps of meat were available. The Christmas Eve version, popular in homes across South Philadelphia, featured cardoon in a clear broth with tiny meatballs and egg ribbons, a dish that bridged the sacred and the practical. The flavor of cardoon is hard to describe to someone who has never tasted it. It has a bitterness similar to artichoke but earthier, with a mineral quality that comes from the soil. The texture when properly cooked is tender but not mushy, with a slight resistance that gives each piece its own presence in the bowl. Today, cardoon is nearly impossible to find in most American grocery stores. It shows up occasionally at farmers markets or in specialty Italian shops, but the wild patches that immigrant families once relied on are mostly gone, paved over, or built upon. The dish survives in a handful of families who still make it every Christmas Eve, but the knowledge of how to find it, clean it, and cook it is fading with each generation. Number 8. Chicken feet broth, brodo di zampe di pollo. At the butcher shops on Arthur Avenue and in the Italian markets of Federal Hill, chicken feet were practically given away. Most customers walked past them. Italian women filled their bags. The feet were blanched, scrubbed, and then simmered for hours in a pot of water with onion, celery, and a few peppercorns. The collagen in the joints and skin dissolved slowly into the liquid, producing a broth so rich that it set into a gel when it cooled. That broth became the foundation of dozens of other dishes. Soups, risottos, sauces, and braised meats all started with the stock that came from parts nobody else wanted. The flavor was clean and deep, far superior to anything made from a bouillon cube. It was the invisible ingredient in Italian immigrant cooking. Nobody saw it on the plate, but everything tasted better because of it. Number 7. Ribollita, reboiled soup. The name itself explains the method. Ribollita started as a basic vegetable and bean soup, usually with cannellini beans, cavolo nero, carrots, and onion. Leftover bread went in. Then it was cooked again the next day, and sometimes again the day after that. Each reheating thickened and deepened the flavors. In the Tuscan communities that settled in parts of San Francisco and in the Italian neighborhoods of Kansas City, ribollita was the answer to a question no one asked out loud. What do you do with yesterday's soup when there is nothing new to add? You cook it again. The bread dissolved into the liquid. The beans broke down further. The greens that had been firm the first day turned silky and sweet. By the third cooking, it was barely a soup anymore. It was a thick, almost porridge-like substance that stuck to the ribs and lasted in the stomach for hours. Poverty has a way of teaching people to cook with time instead of money. Number 6. Caponata, a Sicilian sweet and sour eggplant dish that traveled intact from Palermo to the tenements of Elizabeth Street in Lower Manhattan. Eggplant was fried in olive oil until golden, then combined with celery, onions, tomatoes, capers, olives, and a splash of vinegar sweetened with a little sugar. The result was a complex, layered relish that tasted different with every bite. Some families served it as a main dish over bread. Others spooned it alongside fish or alongside whatever protein was available that week. Caponata improved with time. Made on a Monday, it tasted better on Wednesday. That quality made it invaluable to families who could only cook once or twice a week because of work schedules. The vinegar preserved it. The sugar balanced the acid. The whole thing was a lesson in how contrast creates satisfaction when abundance is not an option. Number 5. Pasta con le sarde, pasta with sardines. In the Sicilian communities of Monterey, California, and in the Italian fishing neighborhoods of Gloucester, Massachusetts, canned sardines were a pantry staple that never ran out. They were cheap, shelf-stable, and packed with protein and fat. The pasta preparation was straightforward. Sardines were broken apart in a pan with olive oil, garlic, and sometimes a handful of raisins and pine nuts if the family could afford them. Breadcrumbs toasted in oil were scattered on top in place of cheese. The breadcrumbs, called mutica in Sicilian dialect, were known as the poor man's parmesan. They added crunch and a toasted nuttiness that complemented the richness of the fish. A box of pasta and a single tin of sardines fed a family of 5. The dish had existed in Sicilian homes for centuries before it ever reached America. When it did, it fit right into the Depression kitchen as though it had been designed for exactly that moment. Number 4. Sausage and peppers, salsiccia e peperoni. Italian pork sausage, sweet or hot, fried in a pan with sliced bell peppers and onions. In the feast days and street festivals of Little Italy in Manhattan and in the Italian parishes of South Boston, sausage and peppers was the smell that pulled people out of their apartments and onto the sidewalk. During the Depression, fresh sausage was a rare luxury for most families. But Italian butchers in the neighborhood stretched the meat with bread, fennel, and garlic, making sausages that were cheaper and more flavorful than the plain pork chops they could not afford. A single link, sliced thin and cooked slowly with a generous amount of peppers and onions, could anchor a dinner for a family of 4. The peppers did most of the work. The sausage provided the illusion of abundance. Together they made a meal that felt like a feast built on almost nothing. Number 3. Zeppole, fried dough balls dusted with powdered sugar. In the Feast of San Gennaro on Mulberry Street, and in every Italian parish festival from Providence to Philadelphia, zeppole were the food that marked the line between ordinary days and celebrations. The dough was simple: flour, eggs, a little butter, and a pinch of sugar, mixed and dropped by the spoonful into hot oil. They puffed up round and golden, hollow in the center, crisp on the outside and soft within. Some families filled them with custard or ricotta cream. Most did not, because the filling was the expensive part. Plain zeppole with a dusting of sugar were enough to make children line up at the kitchen counter. During the Depression, making zeppole was a way of declaring that not everything had to be about survival. Sometimes a family needed something sweet, something frivolous, something that existed for no reason other than joy. Number 2. Stuffed artichokes, carciofi ripieni. Artichokes were one of the few vegetables that Italian immigrants recognized from home and could find at American markets in the right season. In the Italian neighborhoods of New Orleans and in the communities around San Jose, California, stuffed artichokes were a Sunday dish. The artichoke was trimmed, the leaves pried open, and a mixture of seasoned breadcrumbs, garlic, parsley, and grated cheese was pressed between every layer. Then the whole thing was steamed or baked until the leaves pulled away easily and the stuffing had absorbed the liquid from the vegetable. Eating it was a ritual. Each leaf was pulled off, the soft base scraped with the teeth, the breadcrumb filling a little bonus with every bite. The heart at the center, tender and rich, was the reward for patience. It was a dish that forced people to slow down and eat one piece at a time. In a life defined by scarcity, that slowness was its own kind of luxury. Number 1. Minestrone. The word means big soup, and that is exactly what it was. Every vegetable in the kitchen went in. Whatever beans were left, a rind of Parmesan cheese if someone had one, a handful of pasta near the end. Minestrone was not a recipe. It was a principle. Use everything, waste nothing. Make it hot and make it large enough that no one leaves the table wanting more. In every Italian immigrant community across the United States, from the tenements of the Lower East Side to the farm worker camps of the Central Valley, minestrone was the great equalizer. Families with a little more made it with prosciutto ends and fresh basil. Families with almost nothing made it with potato peels and wilted cabbage. Both versions accomplished the same thing. They filled the kitchen with steam and filled the stomach with warmth. The Italian women who stood over those pots did not think of themselves as preserving a tradition. They were solving a problem. And the solution they found, repeated across thousands of kitchens, turned out to be one of the most enduring dishes in American food history. The pot is still on the stove. The recipe is still in the hands. If you grew up with any of these dishes on the table, you already know that the best food does not come from the most expensive ingredients. It comes from the people who knew what to do with the cheapest ones. Drop a comment and let us know which one your family still makes. And if this brought back a memory, hit subscribe so you do not miss what comes next.